Well, let's get started. Thank you to coming to the future of higher ed technology in a post-COVID world. A couple of housekeeping details. It's the end of the conference, so we don't have a lot of housekeeping details, but we also do want to welcome people who are not part of the conference who've come just to hear this panel session. So thank you very much for showing up. We really appreciate it. I'm Joel DeLynn. I'm the CEO of Koali and founder of the Koali company. This is not a Koali product session. So we're talking about technology, and we have three just excellent CIOs that I'm grateful that have come to join us. So Sue is Vice President for University Technology and Chief Information Officer at Case Western Reserve University, and also the Chair of the Board of Directors for EDUCAUSE. Sue, thank you very much for joining us. Mark Roman is the Chief Information Officer at Simon Fraser University, Board of Directors for EDUCAUSE and BCNet. Mark, thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
We will get that Beatles song in before the end. And then Vince Kelly is the Chief Information Officer at the University of California, San Diego. Thanks y'all all for joining us.
Sure.
So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and let people know what this is. So we're gonna throw out some questions. We're not gonna limit. We're not going to, not everyone is necessarily going to answer every question. It's going to be a little bit free form. We'll throw out the questions. Y'all will mostly be doing the talking, and once in a while I'll interject a new question, and we'd love to have you share whatever insights you can. Most of the people that are here are either in IT, they're either CIOs or IT directors from IT in higher ed somewhere, or they're in IT within departments, maybe the research department or the provost's office or something like that. So we have a variety of people that are coming, that are here. So let's start with the first question. What was the most surprising problem that presented itself during the pandemic in 2020?
Who do you want to answer?
I don't want to call on y'all and just let you kind of do it your own, because if you may have something to say on the various questions and you may not. So whomever wants to, go for it.
Sure.
Go ahead, Mark.
I have a couple of things that I think one was I think the first one, the most salient one, is that there's a fabric of trust that you build in an organization, right? By culture, by attitude, all these things that you do. And I think the thing that surprised me most when we went to when we moved into the pandemic was that fabric of trust has started to unravel a little bit. Those kinds of interpersonal conversations where you could run into somebody and line up for coffee, or you could, beginning of a meeting, have a conversation, or end of a meeting, or just running into them on campus. That fabric of trust is not as strong as it used to be. And we're seeing that in a lot of small ways, small individual conflicts and stuff. And that's come as a surprise to me, because I thought with Zoom, we would be able to do all these great things and we would be able to manage the environment. We're moving things forward, we're getting stuff done, but I'm seeing things start to unravel in terms of the culture that we had prior to the pandemic. And I worry that the longer this goes on, the harder this is going to be for us. So that's one of my things that really caught me off guard from the pandemic.
Do you feel like that extends to students and faculty?
I've seen some evidence in meetings where I've been in with faculty that's the case, and certainly I have three kids who are all in post-secondary. They're all doing degrees, and that you see a little bit of that happening between students, but also between students and faculty. Some of the trust issues that are creeping in around exams and cheating and that I think that's creeping into it as well. So.
Thank you.
Yeah,
go ahead.
The most surprising thing for me has been two things. One, the realization that we are all first responders, and thus we suffer first responder fatigue issues. So this is like a firefight now that's been running a year. And so being very conscious about what that does. And I agree with you, Mark, the student isolation problem is a big problem at all levels of students with this. But I also think the individual reactions are different. And I'll use the story of, I'm an incorrigible introvert. My wife is the opposite, as an extrovert. And a couple months into the pandemic, she was lamenting, saying, "Oh my goodness gracious, how much longer is this going to go on?" At the same time, I said, "Oh my gosh, how much longer can this go on?" And so the human response has been very different to this, and that's been surprising for me.
I'll take a little different tact on this question of the most surprising problem that presented itself during the pandemic. I agree. We've had the same thing that Mark Inman's have described, but I took a technical problem with this, and so one of the things that we ran into that actually we were pleasantly prepared for, but we never thought about it in this context, which is how do you teach anatomy to medical school students during a pandemic? Because most times anatomy is taught with cadavers. And so when actually it was a year ago today that our students were on spring break, and we basically said, you know, you can come back, get your stuff and go home. That's it. And so what we did is, like I said, we were pleasantly prepared because we had just built a new medical education complex that houses medicine, nursing, and dental medicine all together. And when we built this with Cleveland Clinic, we didn't want to build a cadaver lab in there. We wanted to teach anatomy differently. And the way we did that is we built an application called Holo Anatomy that's actually teaching anatomy with holograms using the Microsoft HoloLens. And so we had started doing that with everyone in the same room. And then, you know, when the pandemic hit, what we were able to do is we shipped each of the anatomy students a HoloLens to their home. And so they were able to continue class. They actually said they preferred it to everybody in one room or to the cadaver lab itself. And, you know, so we got to do something that we thought in the future would happen because this is what these things are really built for. We thought it would happen in the future, but we didn't realize it was going to happen this quickly. And so we were really able to prove that it works. And our students, they are retaining 40% more 8 months later than they did in a cadaver lab. So it was, I guess, a pleasant surprise that pleasantly we were prepared for. and we got to change culture. I think way before we could have done it without something like a pandemic.
That's incredibly cool. The acceleration of some of these technologies has been amazing. When I was at Microsoft, it was probably 2004. It wasn't Microsoft, it was a third party, but there was a tool where you had like a little scalpel. It was a real scalpel, and it was attached to a little pressure giving device. And you had hologram glasses on, and you could pierce into a skull, and you would feel like as you went through, it was putting pressure on the device, and you were seeing yourself as if you were doing surgery. It was incredible, but it was like $100,000. Mark, it looks like you want to say something, and then I want to go to Vince and hear, Vince, what was the most surprising thing for you?
Wow, that sounds really cool. And not being a big fan of blood, that would be the best way for me to learn. You know what's Sue, I was listening to you and I was thinking the kind of expectations that happen here are setting up new expectations for IT. So, you know, as Vince said, we're like first responders. It's very stressful. We're suffering first responder syndrome. We're delivering things like what you've done very quickly. My example is we moved to Zoom in 3 hours. We discovered that Blue Jeans wasn't going to cut it on the first day of the online service. So, you know, in 3 hours we had Zoom up and running. And then I was talking to people on campus, and they said, "Well, why don't you just do everything in IT that quickly?" And we can't. I mean, you know, when you look at all the work that we did after we went live with Zoom to make it a full production service with all the documentation, service desk support and all that, it took a lot longer. I think we calculated about 366 days to do it. But the expectation has changed now. Hey, IT can pivot. They can turn on a dime. And I worry that we're going to always be, from forever after, being treated as first responders. And it's going to be tough, I think. It's going to be an interesting set of expectations that we're going to have to live up to.
Yeah, another thing that really pops for me is I'm going to borrow a metaphor from sort of geography and plate tectonics and underseas, where in some earthquakes, plates shift abruptly. And I think COVID has created an abrupt shift for all of humankind. And I think that shift is in our relationship to geography. And some of the trends that are coming out here, it's like a tsunami now. You can't really see it, but it's going to happen. We're already seeing that suburban house prices are going through the roof in some areas because people are voting with their feet. I can work from home and I need more space. Businesses are voting with their feet and saying, don't come back to work. Universities have voted with their feet by getting education out there, but there are some instructors who are now voting with their feet. I have an instructor in our faculty senate, and we're on a Zoom session. I noticed 2 skis on the wall in the back. I'm like, where are you? He goes, well, I'm in my condo at Mammoth, so that's where I teach my classes now. I'm like, are you coming back? He goes, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. And so I think this abrupt shift of our relationship to geography is yet to feel its way out. Auto manufacturers have dropped their production, which has now actually caused a bit of a price increase on cars. Drive miles are going to continue to drop. This is going to have some interesting ripple effects across all of our missions that, so I view it as kind of like this tsunami from an abrupt plate shift that occurred that's now going to come slowly and then rise up fairly quickly.
It'll be interesting to see. There's a certain amount of loyalty when you choose a university to a region or the one that your parents went to or brand or whatever. It'll be interesting to see as more and more universities go to this remote opportunity, if people will have that same level of loyalty to my home school or whatever. Garrett Yoshimi, who's the CIO of the University of Hawaii system, asked the question, and y'all all know Garrett. What kind of disruptive strategic changes are you folks considering given the opportunity of the pandemic? So for example, hybrid workforce, no offices, rethinking libraries.
I can kick that off. I think, so one of the, I don't know that I know the answers yet. I mean, I think we're still trying to figure those things out. And I think a lot of it will be, you know, how do people really want to work? I mean, I've lost 4 staff that have got jobs that they can work from home permanently, and I'm not able to say that yet. But I guess one of the other really, I think, more strategic things that we had happen, and I think will continue on, is we have a pretty large international population of students, and many couldn't get here or even get visas to come. And so what we did is we partnered with, many of them are from China. And so we partnered with a university in China that just built a new campus, and they had residence halls available. And so we had, I think it was 325 students. They only had that many beds, so they couldn't all go to this university. And some of them had to still learn from home. But we partnered with this university to basically provide housing and a community for our international students in China. They were still taking classes here, and we had to figure out things like faculty didn't think about the time difference, and so they were giving tests like at 3 a.m. and stuff like that. So we had to work through a lot of those things. We sent them like little care packages of, Case Western Reserve stuff, t-shirts and stuff like that, to help them kind of feel connected. But it worked remarkably well. There was a few that it didn't work for. There's a few students, but I mean, it was like 5, out of 300 or 250, whatever that number is, a large number. But I think that could be a whole new model for international learning. They don't really have to come here.
They need Wi-Fi and some people to hang out with and a quiet place to study, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think they lose a lot of other things that they get by being on campus, and culture and those kinds of things. But just for learning itself, you can do that anywhere. So I think we're starting to think about that in other countries as well, is to say, can we set this model up differently, because we have limited space here in Cleveland. I mean, there's only so much you can do in this amount of space. And so, this is another way we can reach students differently.
Thank you.
I worry about what happens to your brand. So, you know, the brand of I work for Simon Fraser University. It's a well-known university in Canada, and the name carries, and people in Canada know about it. But in Bangalore, it's meaningless. And so, what is that? How does this international piece translate? And as we as a university earn more of our revenue from international tuition than we do from domestic tuition, and that's been the case for several years. If we do shift to a fully or a more substantial online presence, our brand deteriorates. And then how do we compete? And this is a really key component of our revenue. Are we going to lose that? And so we need to start rethinking how we communicate, how we create a value proposition out in the international market. And I think we got some really big challenges ahead of us. And then you layer on top of that the geopolitical issues that we see around security attacks coming from certain geopolitical regions. The fact that we have to take some vendors' hardware out of our infrastructure because we won't get funding if some of our traffic goes through Huawei routers, for example. So you blend in this international competition with geopolitical technology issues and security issues. It's going to be an interesting ride over the next couple of years as the effects of this tsunami, as Vince refers to it, as the effects of this start to really have an impact on what we do.
Yeah, I'm going to put a friendly amendment on all this. I'm in all of this. There's one company I'm watching carefully that might have insights for higher ed, and that's Disney. Disney has theme parks and a lot of money in place. And could we envision a world where the Disney theme park no longer exists? Can we envision a world where a filled hockey stadium no longer exists? No, that's not in our DNA. So I don't think the question so much is, does place matter? I think it really does. I think the question becomes, how do you orchestrate a carefully interwoven physical and digital experience for all parties, differentially so, and benefiting the individual differences in our learners and our audiences? That's a profoundly technical question, an IT question, but it's also pretty much a profoundly place-based question as well, because the human instinct to want to see each other face to face is very important. The other element to this is trust, and this is where the proctoring question comes in. And to remind people, the digitization of trust is not a new concept. It's been around a while. But the one question I always put to folks is, would you choose your spouse based upon their blockchain certificate?
No.
Well, don't laugh, because but that represents the paradox of trust. At the most important critical decisions, there will be no tech involved. It's only at the lower levels of trust, and proctoring enters this very interesting middle realm of trust. And so, all these issues are going to get irritated even more.
Yeah, and I think you both make really good points there. I knew this would be a fun discussion with these two guys. Vince never ceases to amaze me, and Mark makes me laugh all the time. But I think those are all really good points. This was just what we did really quickly. It may or may not ever work again, but if it was a lot better than saying, 400 students were not going to be able to attend courses this past fall, at our institution. And so, I think there's a lot there. I also think just online learning, I don't know about you guys, but it's for us, I have online learning and administration in my portfolio. And I swear, last February, I was talking to faculty, College of Arts and Sciences, all these different faculties saying, we really need to think about this. We have an audience that we can't get to. They can't physically come to us. We have some online programs and stuff already, but we wanted to really expand our access. And, I had one faculty that he was so staunchly against this, that, we could never teach as well, and students could never learn as well as in the classroom, or and I actually won't argue that point, but but it was so funny because um, he had to really rethink his teaching, and we helped him, and he got higher evaluations than he'd ever gotten. And I think, it had nothing to do with online teaching. It had everything to do with rethinking his courses. And so now he doesn't want to come back.
Yeah.
And so, so we had this other problem now. But, I think that, again, just I tell my staff, I've told them all through this, let's not waste a good crisis. This is the time we can make changes without having to go through 12 months of analysis. So let's do it. And I think it's showing in some of our faculty and in what we're doing.
I'm just sorry to jump in, but Mark brought up a great point on brand, and I think that's really interesting because brand is in higher ed is still related to geography and probably will be for a very long time. And so each institution now is deciding what's our geography and how does our brand play in that geography. And you're absolutely right. The more you project online, the more you get into another person's killing ground and vice versa. So in a way, all brands become harder to compete the more they go online. And that's really interesting. However, we have examples in industry. So now the question becomes, if you want to fight the brand warfare in the online space, you have to have the resources to sustain the brand marketing and brand building needed to do that over the long haul. And that's a heck of a lot of money. So I think a lot of institutions are recalibrating what they define their geography as and how they're going to define their brand. And certainly we're doing that at UC San Diego. I think that's a strategic recalibration we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's a question about the trust. So we've talked about trust a couple of times, and a question came up from a current educator. So I wanted to read it from her verbatim. This is Liz Christensen. Liz says, I'm interested in this narrative about the unraveling of the fabric of trust and the setting up of new expectations around IT. I've seen a substantial uptick in cheating this year. One student explained it to me this way. All of her other professors were using Proctorio or some other form of technology to prevent monitor cheating. Because I was not, I must not care about cheating. Other students agreed that the use of technology actually conveys meaning to them. So her question is, do you find the push to digital transformation has changed other basic paradigms of understanding on your campuses?
We have to be careful that we don't get caught up in this has changed everything and the whole world is never going to be the same. Because as we start to think about going back onto campus, the world it's going to be a lot trickier. If everyone's on campus prior to COVID and everything works a certain way, and we've been doing it since Socrates. Now we have a pandemic, and we've switched, and we've successfully switched. It was shocked that it worked so well, but it did. Not perfect. And then in the fall, is where I live, we're going to be back full time in the fall, and I worry that there's going to be this notion that we want to be able to do things. We want to take advantage of what we learned from COVID, and so we want to be able to say, let's create this dual modality, and let's have some things online and some things in person, and there's going to be a presence disparity. So for folks who are physically present, the interaction is inevitably richer. You have a three-dimensional experience, the person's right there. And that's, as humans, what we're wired to really connect with. But if we assume that we also want to have a second modality where people can zoom in and feel like they participate just as much as the people that are live, I think that's going to be a surprising shock that that's not going to work. I think that there's a dilution of effectiveness when you have some people in the room and some people not. And I think prior to COVID, attending board meetings where some people were coming in through Blue Jeans or whatever, and the rest of the people were in the room, the folks that were on the video conference were always ignored. And it wasn't deliberate. It was an inevitability of human nature. And so when we come back in September, we need to be really, really careful about trying to run meetings where some people are on Zoom and some people aren't. I don't believe it's going to work as well as people think it will. I think it's going to create, second-class citizens. The ones who are on Zoom are not going to have the same rich experience. I think that teaching is going to be a non-trivial problem when you think about dual modalities and the effectiveness of teaching to folks who aren't live and in person. And I think the research is going to be challenging as well if we assume that we can just connect that easily. So I think that we need to temper our expectations about what we've learned from the COVID experience and be cautious about how we implement these things in the fall.
I'm going to give a counterpoint. I'm going to answer Liz's question. I don't think people have nearly thought enough about how their understanding of this has to change. I don't think that's the way it works. I think there'll be 2 or 3 leaders in the country who will figure that out, jump ahead. We'll watch them and go, what the heck's going on? And then we'll do our reverse engineering of what they're doing. And years later, we'll begin to adopt. Some will survive, some will not. Mostly in these changes, the basic understandings do not change a jot. We tend to accommodate to fit the past. And I think the biggest challenge we have here is I actually think that there is a structural shift occurring that's differentially hitting generations, meaning younger generations more so than older. And we have to start to reason about where the puck is going here and where we need to go, but it's going to take some time.
Yeah, I think that's true too. And I think I don't think we know yet. And I mean, we keep trying to find at Case-Western Reserve, we keep trying to find what's the silver linings. What do we want to keep? What do we want to throw away? What do we want to go back to? And and some of those things I don't think we know yet. So I'm gonna give you a counterpoint, Mark, because of you are an extrovert, and so being in the room is really good for you. I've learned, and I learned with my staff that, and I've seen in the classroom that the introverts will chat. They will put something in chat where they may not speak up ever. Now, that hybrid mix of some online, some in the room, that's really hard, and it's not necessarily successful. We're kind of going either you're here or you're online or something like that, because it's really hard for the faculty to manage. But even to her question, what's going to change? Maybe assessments change. Maybe we don't do testing anymore like that. Maybe it's not an answer.
Sue brings up an excellent point. I've often observed that people will often confess to technology that they won't confess to their fellow human. It offers kind of this confessional screen for which they can reveal. And you're right. I think that has huge implications for education. So one of the areas I think we can explore is the sense of how that trust and relationship between individuals alters because of the technology, and then how do students interact differentially so in that environment.
I mean, I've even thought about, even like in my own meetings and stuff. I mean, even if we come back and all sit around the same table, we may all have a Zoom in front of us, just to have that conversation that, the person that can't jump in there or won't jump in there still can contribute in a different way.
Yeah, years ago, I remember doing a survey of students who are at risk, and we did a stress survey. How stressed are you? And we got the most stressed students, and we took that back to their advisors, and the advisors were like, I just spoke to them yesterday. I had no idea they were just about ready to walk out the door. And we were able to save a bunch of those students and bring them back in and help deal with the issues they've had. So I think the use of the digital technology, and how that works has always been there, but now we got greater opportunities post-COVID.
Yeah. If I could just go into this with my elbow, if I could just go into the corner with my elbows up to actually do a Canadian hockey analogy here, because I guess Gary thinks I'm not doing enough hockey comments. Sorry. As a raging extrovert, I do love the in-person experience, and maybe there's a little bit of bias there, but I think that there's, as opposed to just doing an introvert extrovert kind of lens on this, when we come back on the campus, we need to think about folks that are risk averse, folks that are maybe risk cautious, and then folks that are really risk tolerant. and they're all going to react differently, right? So the risk averse folks are going to use the EDUCAUSE model, they'll want to revert back, right? They'll want to revert back to where they were. And we'll see faculty that are like that. We'll also see folks that are somewhere in the middle. They're risk cautious. They're willing to take some chances, and they're the ones that are going to be mindful of, here's a business case for doing something differently. Let's look at what the model could be to make this work and try some new things. And then you've got the risk tolerant folks, and you get some researchers who are just going to be way out there, and they're going to go, you know what, let's just try doing everything using holograms, and we'll do it all in 3D, and we'll have a lot of fun with that. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, we'll try something else, right? And our campuses exist because we have these three different cultures working together, and they're successful because we've made it work together. So I think there's no one answer. I think it will depend on the individual cultural predispositions of different parts of the campus. And I think that's where we'll end up.
I think flipped classroom is kind of a naughty word in higher ed, but like I think there's so many classes that I've had or that my kids have had that would have never been good if they wouldn't have the instructor right there, viscerally communicating with them and interacting with them and being responsive to what was happening in the classroom. And then 80% of the classes I took, it would have been better if I just did it at home and, you know, looked up YouTube and whatever. And my son just went through that this last year. He's a great student, but he would sit in Zoom listening to class while he was researching other topics on his computer. And he's an introvert. He didn't want to be there. So you need both. And it's not this kind of either or, you need both. So we're going to have to adapt. There's one more question. We're almost out of time. This has been incredible. We could go for another 3 hours. Okay, there's two more questions I'm going to combine. John Newman asks about making decisions about technology. Like, how are you, let me just read his question. With regard to the massive variety in tech and software solutions, how do you strategically manage this? How do you choose what to use and what to support? And then there's another question about, how does your IT shop change? Like, what are you going to have to do to change to adapt to the future? And I think this is probably our last question. So I'd love for each of you to get a chance to answer it. Take your time to think through it.
Well, I think that the managing the vendors is always problematic. As Fred Singer at Echo 360 put it, higher ed is too big for the smalls and too small for the bigs. It's this in-between land for investors. And we feel it as CIOs. We run into it all our careers, every day, every month. And it just, you know, you just keep at it, and you keep trying to pick what you think are the best vendors that have the best tune and fit for the market. I think for the IT in higher ed, we really have to track the Googles, the Facebooks, and all those other companies of the world in how they produce things, because that's the kind of the recruiting pool, and not entirely, but the recruiting pool that we're dealing with, and how to change our innards of our technology to deal with this new cloud world. So and there's a lot of thoughts on that, but I've been thinking deeply about both of those issues, and especially, you know, how do you transform the IT shop to deal with tomorrow?
Thank you, Vince.
Go, Mark.
Want me to go? Okay. I think that how you approach decision making around technology is a stewardship process, and so you're not. It shouldn't be the CIO going, I looked at this vendor, I looked at that vendor, and I think this one's the best. It should be the CIO facilitating a decision that the university makes. So what kind of process do you put in place where you say, I've done some analysis, I think this is what's going to happen in the world coming forward. This is the new world that we're facing. Here's some technologies that can really help us move in that direction. And then you get the university involved in the conversation around, and then the right people involved in the conversation, and the university makes the decision, not IT. In some regards, IT is Switzerland. We're neutral in the actual making of the decision, but we're very active in facilitating to make sure that folks have the right information to make a university decision. And I think as we emerge from the pandemic, that's going to become more important than ever.
I take a little bit different approach, I guess. I mean, not with stakeholder management and stuff. I think, it's just like it always has been in some ways. Sometimes it's faster. But, I use the university stakeholders as advisors. I do say, I think if I can get fired for this decision, I'm going to make it. I think it probably the software systems and other systems. I don't know that the process will change. I think the team will change. I think it will change for the better, because I think we're talking. I know it's weird, and but I think we're talking more now to our stakeholders than we ever have, and it's at least at some levels. And it's just because we've had to, we had to put up a vaccination site. We had to figure out how to, compare compliance to, if you came in a door. We had to do all these things like in hours, not in days or months. So I think that the way we work just may, as I think we kind of started on this, but may be the firefighter forever, and it'll be hard to slow it down. And I don't know that I want to either.
Okay, so one word. So think about it for a minute. If you describe the future of technology in higher ed with one word, what would it be?
Exciting.
Okay.
Intricately
intertwined.
That's 2 words.
Sorry.
That's not one word.
Okay, Sue's like, I get a second one too.
I got one word.
What is
fun. It's always fun.
Y'all, this is incredible. We're out of time. So thank you so much for taking the time. This has been super great. So really appreciate it. And thanks to all of you who are attending the session, both from the Quality Build conference and also people who weren't involved in the conference and just wanted to see y'all